Well, this is Cannock village in Strathglass. Strath, a wide place where people live. It couldn't be more appropriate. But away back until the mid-40s, there wasn't a village here at all. This village really sprang up with the building of a great hydroelectric complex in 3 glens. And from this position here, 3 of the major glens of Scotland penetrate right through to the west coast. So we're virtually almost in the middle of Scotland now, between the North Sea and the Atlantic. And this place has always been a place of settlement, notably by the Chisholm clan. And about 1945, when the Scottish National Parks Committee were thinking of areas for the future that could be national parks, lungs for the people, their minds centred here because of the possibility of walking right through from Bewley, right through over 20 miles across the mountains, finishing up in Kintail. A marvellous prospect, and I was one of those who looked forward to this taking place. But instead of that taking place, in 1947, the Hydroelectric Board Act was passed, and it was decided to build great power schemes and harness the power of these glens, because in the past they'd been notorious for flooding the people out of their homes. And it was a good idea to harness it. The only snag is you can't reconcile 2 things. You can't keep a glen natural and at the same time make some of the biggest dams in Scotland. And in this lonely place here, an army of some 1,500 men moved in, and for a year or 2 there was chaos in this glen. And then in 1951, the power flowed, the scheme, the first phase, was in operation. And those of us who loved Glen Affric felt very despondent because so much was underwater. But a lot of time has passed. The old work camp became a forester's camp. Houses were occupied, had never been occupied before, by people who were actually working on the glen. A miracle has taken place in the interval, and I'm going to look at it today, and I'm expecting something good. Well, I thought the brilliant sunshine was too good to last. The sun would have roasted you yesterday, and today I've moved into winter, into Glen Affric. I must say though, it's really a marvellous scene. A fairyland. All the birch trees here are almost like Christmas trees. Great bluffs with icicles hanging. Below me the river with great lumps of ice. Few pine trees. This is just the very edge of the big forest, the primeval forest of Scotland. And thinking of how it came to disappear, one of the possible explanations, apart from the early burning by man, may have been that the climate moved against it. Because when the original forest grew up, Scotland, in fact, had a marvellous, sunny, dry climate. And that was before man came to it. The evidence is only in the peat bogs. But up here, we can see very much a relic, a primeval relic. And I'm looking forward to seeing it through the eyes of Finlay McRae, the district officer of East of Rossshire, whose beat is Glen Affric. If you're looking for a special bit of big, untamed Highland country, you could hardly do better than come here. It's easy to get the feeling that there's nobody else in the world except you. And it's not just because the hills are the highest in Scotland, north of the Great Glen. No, it's the way it's cut up by wooded rock bluffs. In fact, you've got to traverse 10 miles of narrow road before you come to an inhabited house. You're more likely to meet a red deer than a human being. And when the road ends, you're in nothing more than a footpath leading 18 miles on to Loch Duich in Kintail. But I'm expecting to be picked up by a man who knows it intimately. Well, Finlay McRae, it's a fine snowy morning for going up to Glen Affric.
Yes, it's rather a pity that I had to drag you out on a day like this, Tom.
Oh, well, I'm hoping for better things, even although this is one of the notoriously unsettled bits of Scotland.
That's right.
And your district is mainly a good weather area, so why are you so far west here?
Well, this is an enclave, a separate enclave in my district that takes me almost to Kintail, which suits me very well. I like to have my feet in the west.
That's because you're a skyman.
Oh yes, that's right.
And this particular glen, I know, because it's a country of very high peaks and very wild forest, it's posed a lot of problems in Scottish history, hasn't it?
Yes, it's, I suppose it must have been about the wildest country in Scotland. And it's still, the western reaches of this glen are still among the, perhaps the finest scenery in Scotland and probably the wildest country. And I think perhaps the trees add something to this scene. This forest came here really when the ice receded. So we're talking about a forest that's been in existence for about 8,000 or 9,000 years.
And I think one of the reasons that foresters tended to neglect the Affric pines was it was all deer forest. 100 years ago, it was entirely sporting.
That's right. The pine forest really was used as a sanctuary for deer in the winter time. They found plenty of shelter in the forest and also rough vegetation for browsing.
And part of the browsing was on the trees.
Part of the browsing was on the pine forest.
So no wee trees got a chance to grow up.
That's right. Between sheep and deer, the pine forest gradually disappeared.
So in Glen Affric, despite the length of the glen and such a marvellous stretch of old pines, they were all old veterans getting close to their last legs.
That's right, Tom. We have trees up here that are 300, 330 years old. And once you get to that age, you're bound to be on your last leg.
Well, undoubtedly it was the sheer ruggedness of this heathery country which prevented the complete destruction of the pine forest. Somehow or other, the best parts remaining had to be enclosed to allow new seedlings to grow up. A mighty job and an expensive one to tackle. Oh well, we're in amongst them now.
You are there. There's the sun coming through too. You'll be interested.
Okay, great stuff.
Well, we're at the beginning of Loch Benevian here, and from here to the west really is the reserve, especially on the southern side of Benevian. This is where the enclosures are.
Now, this is really the beginning of the artificial loch.
That's right, yes.
And this small dam is really all there is of dam in Glen Affric.
This is all in the whole of Glen Affric, yes.
So
the water is pumped through, you see, from Malardoch through to this one.
by tunnel through the mountain?
A tunnel through the mountain, that's right.
And in this way they managed to hold Glen Affric as natural as we see it today.
Pretty well as it is.
Now, I think I'm right in saying that in historical times, in the last 300 years, there's been nothing but destruction of this forest.
That's right, that's the history of it, sadly.
And a destruction mainly caused by thoughtless land use. Man has burnt it to make grazings for sheep. He's also used it for the smelting of iron. He's overgrazed it to make deer forests. And something had to go, and that was a natural pine.
That's correct, yes.
So, Finlay, when you said you divided it into 3 areas, you mean you fenced them?
That's right. They were fenced. Initially, there was one large enclosure, and then we subdivided that by using 2 fences. So we have 3 separate fenced areas now.
Totaling how many acres?
About 2,500 acres.
Yes. And what about this we're looking at now then?
Well, if you look down the glen here, you'll see that even out with the fenced area, we're getting regeneration here, largely because of this reduction in the grazing pressure.